Hi everyone, it's Professor Clark, and in this lecture, which will be pretty short, we are going to give a very quick and brief overview of the rise of Muscovy and how medieval Rus transitioned into the Tsardom of Muscovy and became what we now know as Russia. As I said in the previous lecture on medieval Rus, during the time of the Mongol-Tatar invasion in the 13th century, Moscow was a small trading post. And it was sacked, but it was so small that it largely escaped attention. And this enabled it to rebuild quickly. And then the princes of Moscow, who had been just these kind of, princes of this backwater, started acting as the Khanate's representatives and tax collectors. So they basically got in good with the Khan and were his representatives. And this meant that they vaulted themselves from being this kind of unimportant backwater to being the most powerful and important city-state in Rus, which was now transforming into Russia. And they were able, over the next couple of hundred years, to considerably expand Moscow's power and influence. And so if you look at the map on the slide here, you can see how they started off with the dark green, just having this sort of small territory around Moscow, and then it expanded all the way out towards Eurasia and up into the Arctic, and it became this large and powerful entity. It should be noted that although Muscovy was somewhat different from Kiev and Rus, we sort of think of it as two separate entities in a way, it was still being ruled by the House of Rurik. The princes of Moscow were still direct descendants through the male line of Rurik, and so they saw it still as a continuation of Kiev and Rus. It just, the center of power was no longer in Kiev, it was in Moscow. In this last slide, we're going to talk about one of Russia's most important, most fascinating, and most tragic figures, someone you've probably heard of, and that is Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan IV, and how he both turned the Duchy of Muscovy into an empire and brought about the fall of the House of Rurik. So Ivan IV ruled from 1533 to 1584, so the latter part of the 16th century. And some of his greatest achievements include ending the rule of the Khanate. So the Khanate, the Golden Horde, the Khans, these descendants of Batu Khan and his invading army, they had become weakened and fragmented, as tends to happen, and the princes of Moscow had been sort of defeating them here and there leading up to this, but under Ivan the Terrible, he basically smashed the power of the Khanate. He captured Kazan, their capital, and dramatically expanded Moscow's territory, especially to the east. So it was now all the way into Central Asia. In 1547, he then declared himself Tsar, which is the Russian word for Caesar, of all of Russia. And so under him, the Duchy of Moscow became the Tsardom of Muscovy, the Tsardom of Russia, or the Russian Empire. And so he dramatically expanded Russia's territory, as I said, and turned what had been the remnants of Kiev and Rus that had then turned into the Duchy of Muscovy, or the Duchy of Moscow, into the Russian Empire. However, he also killed his heir, ending the rule of the House of Rurik. And this picture you see in the slide is a very famous picture by Ilya Repin, and it shows him holding his dying son after he accidentally killed him. So Ivan the Terrible was known for flying into these crazy rages, and he got into an argument with his son, possibly because he had pushed his daughter-in-law, that is to say Ivan the Terrible, supposedly got angry at his daughter-in-law, pushed her down some stairs, causing her to miscarry. His son flew into a rage. Ivan flew into a rage and murdered his son. And then, ended the rule of the House of Rurik. He had another son, whom we'll hear about in a minute in the next lecture, who did inherit his rule, but this other son had no issue, did not have any sons. And so Ivan both transformed Rus/Muscovy into an imperial territory, but also brought about the end of the 700-year-old dynasty of the House of Rurik.